I will introduce our panel, our panelists and experts after the presentations. And yeah, then I start with some slides to give you some insights. What happened at ICANN in terms of competition. ICANN did a study over the last years and has engaged some consulting companies doing these studies with them, with a special focus on how the many new GTLDs are contributing to the mission of ICANN, enhancing competition, choice, consumer trust, and some things like this. And I will show you some results of that study, which might be also part of the discussion afterwards. So what we saw, I'm sorry, I have this slide only in German version here, how the development of the domain names, especially the TLDs, was going on there. In the early 80s, .APA was introduced, and then we have later in the 80s .com.net.org, along with .de and other CCTLDs, which are still here on the run because we have some IDN CCTLDs introduced. And then long time, nothing happened, and we had the first round with 7 new GTLDs being added. Only 7. There were over 200 applications at this time, and they allowed only 7. I think .info and .biz are the most prominent. And then we had a round 2 in 2004, where things like .travel, jobs, tel, and XXX was introduced. And then again, 10 years, nothing new in the TLD space. And then at end of 2013, the first new TLDs entered the route. And then we saw the last 2 years a skyrocket in new TLDs, and additionally 1,250 new GTLDs were added to the route. And that's why ICANN needed to do a study on the competition issue. You see the difference here. If you compare number of domain names, it looks quite different, but the number of TLDs is really amazing that has been added to the route. So the ICANN review on these topics like consumer trust and competition was part of the affirmation of commitments, and the review was designed to see what really happened with the new TLDs, and that's still ongoing. ICANN will make more studies. They want to have more data on the introduction of new TLDs and what happens with the whole TLD universe. And so the results of I show you some tables from that 140 pages study, which is on the wiki. It's one of the sources you might want to read. And you see how the new TLDs contributed to the increase of domain names. And if you look here, the 50%, that's the increase of new TLDs and legacy TLDs registrations. And that the 50% means that the new TLDs in the last 3 years contributed to 50% of the increase of all domain name registration in this time. That's a significant number. And there are several comparisons here with different outcomes. The GTLDs were growing thanks to .com and the Chinese people buying a lot of .com names, a lot. And while the CCTLDs didn't have this Chinese effect at this time. So there was a significant contribution here in the growth of the TLDs. Then we saw how were they accepted in the marketplace, and the ear to or the eyes to the marketplace are the registrars, because they sell the domain names to their end customers. And here you see more than 200 69 of the 1,500 at this time were added by or promoted by 75 big registrars, and that was 61% of the new TLDs. We had this number, I need to explain, from 1,250. In the 1,250, there are at least 550 brand TLDs which are not available at the registrar level. So there's a different number you should have as basis, which could be seen here. So the sales channel really integrated the new TLDs very quickly, and this led, accordingly to the study, to a much greater consumer choice. There's still the discussion if there's meanwhile too much choice, because from the psychological standpoint, too much competition or too much choice is even worse than having less choice for people, but that might be a part of the next part of the study. Then we have here a lot of new registrar operators, especially from China. You see here this is from China, this one, I think this one, GMO is Japan. So a lot of Chinese registrars entered the market which hadn't been there with significant numbers. So also widening of the choice of registrars there. And then registry service providers means that's a back end. That's a back end providers for the new TLDs, and we saw quite a number of new back end providers there. Some were coming from the GTLD space, some have been developed from the CCTLDs like SIDN or AFNIC or what else? TLD box, for instance, we have here in the TLD space. So there was also a significant increase by the factor of 60 in the G space, because we had there main players like VeriSign, Affilias, Newstar, and only a few other ones. Then table 6. Interestingly, what happened in terms of registrations? We know .com has 130 million domain registrations, and everybody was looking for the killer new TLD which could catch up with .com. That didn't happen, but we have a lot of TLDs which are smaller TLDs. So 93% of the TLDs are smaller than 50,000, and and the typical TLDs we see these days are niche TLDs, targeted TLDs, and geographic top-level domain names like .horse, for instance, .fishing, let's say, and we have some others like .web, which is coming, and the geographics, there are 63 geographic domain names there, and the biggest one has about 75,000 registrations. And if you compare these small niche numbers somehow with existing TLDs, which are for a long time there, you see, for instance, .travel, the biggest one here, has 18,000, and they are quite that niche, the travel niche, and they survived, and they operate profitable. They must operate profitable because they are private organizations. And so you can still survive or run profitable with a small number. That niche TLD, they are really working. Not all, but most of them. Then, interestingly, what happened to the prices? So the average legacy GTLD prices are about they have different numbers, the average wholesale price and the weighted one. And I heard from the CCTLDs, I think the average price in CCTLDs to the registrar is about 6 to 7 euros or something like this. Depending on the CC and how you... Yeah, a lot lower. But interestingly, the new TLDs managed to give added value to the space, and they had much, much higher prices, and they had been accepted by consumers. You can think of why they have been accepted, maybe to the niche, because they were targeted or geographic ones. That's another point further studies should look for. And then one big concern was that ICANN approved a lot very similar TLDs. You have something like .property, .properties, .watch, .watches, .car, .cars, or game and games. And there was an objection procedure, and most objections decided that even car and cars are not similar to each other. So they are both in the root, and they are all accepted, and further studies need to find out what happens with this very similar TLDs. Which one survives, or can both stay there in the market? So conclusions here in that study from ICANN had been the new TLD program has led to a dramatic increase in consumer choice. It doesn't say if it's good or bad at the end of the day. It has a modest increase in competition altogether and a minimal impact on consumer trust. I didn't put on consumer trust things here because that was not part of the competition thing. So ICANN needs still a lot of more data, especially in the pricing area, but these are quite some interesting results we see with that big study here, and I can really recommend you to read the study. There are a lot of small bits and pieces which are quite interesting. Okay, that's my intro, and I would like to ask Elena to give her introduction. Elena.
It works. It works. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this report, Nick. I have to start with a disclaimer. I work for the European Commission, so by definition, I'm not knowledgeable about as much as you are about the domain name industry and the whole thing. I'm here to talk to you about the .eu refit. Refit is a fitness check. It's the so-called fitness check. It's a program whereby the European Commission checks its various regulations to see if they're still up to date, if they need to be changed, if they need to be repealed, maybe. Now, the .eu, as a domain name, has two regulations. One was adopted in 2002, and the other one in 2004. The domain name was delegated by ICANN in 2005. So there's been over 10 years that those regulations were adopted, and I can say they're quite outdated. They create some administrative problems to us, to the registry, plus the market has significantly changed, as we have seen. The .eu is kind of a special case domain name, in brackets, I would say. And this has to do with the objectives behind setting up this domain name. It was not set up for profit, as many other CCTLDs as well. The objectives for setting up this domain name was to boost e-commerce in the EU, and it was to create a digital identity for European citizens and European organizations. So it was supposed to mean that you work and you live and you have your business in the EU, and this is the signal, your digital signal behind it. In this sense, we can say that the .eu domain name is advantaged over other TLDs because you have a bigger market that you can reach out to. On the other hand, it is also disadvantaged because of the regulations that I just mentioned. Other TLDs don't have these strict regulations they have to abide by, so they can easily adapt to the market changes or adapt to other things that they need to. So our main consideration now, what is a refit that I mentioned before? It's a fitness check. It's kind of two processes. First, you have to evaluate what has happened from the past until today. So we have to look at the objectives, as I mentioned before, boosting e-commerce and creating a digital identity, and see if the domain name really succeeded in it. If not, we have to address it. And the other part of the exercise is to see for the future, as I said, if you found problems with evaluating the past situation, you have to develop policy options for it. This is the point where we are now. We have launched an online public consultation where everyone can answer, and I would urge you to look at it if you have some time. It would be really useful for us. We are also having other consultation activities. And after we have concluded these consultation activities, we're going to propose new options. Just to give you some ideas, because we already are thinking of some issues, the fact that there is no more this legal separation between the registry, the registrar, and the registrant, which I understand was never the case for the CCTLDs. This, in the regulation, the .eu cannot do it. We're considering if we should lift that or not. This is to be seen. Another serious issue that we're considering is, apart from the objectives of e-commerce or identity, the whole internet governance sphere has dramatically changed and is still changing. Should we think of ways whereby the .eu registry would be more actively helping in various areas in internet governance? It is already doing some, like for multilingualism, for example. EU is based on multilingualism, and but with the domain name, we want to support that as well. So we want this domain name to be available in all scripts. But other areas that we should push the registry to be more active for the sake of EU priorities as set in other areas. That's more or less from me. Thank you for listening. Back to you, Dirk.
Thank you, Elena. Can we have the Twitter wall again on so that everybody can follow the... Okay, thank you very much. Okay, after the small introductions, I'd like to introduce the panel and start from right. That's Adi Jürgens. He's from Zone Media or Zone.ee, which is the biggest registrar here in Estonia. And yeah, welcome to that session. Elena self-introduced her from, yeah, I saw Next Generation Internet was one of your titles. And that's the unit, okay. That's a unit in there. And then we have Jörg Schweiger, who is CEO of DENIC, running .de, the German CCTLDs. Then we have Elena Galistan, Public Relations Manager in ISOC Armenia. Sorry? Jana. Then we have Marcel Hoffmann, Key Account Manager at Switch, the CCTLD from Switzerland. And finally, we have Andrea Beccali, Senior Manager, Stakeholder Engagement, Europe with ICANN. And we have Mr. Zackman from Valideus doing the minutes, let's say, or the summary or the messages in EuroDIG. And we have the Dusan, the remote moderator. So you bring up things that people ask from outside. Okay. So then we both start with the questions. So maybe I start with the first competition question. I have a few ones. So my idea was running a new GTLDs, and we have in all the countries where you have a geographic top-level domain name, like in the Netherlands, you have .amsterdam and .frl for Friesland, and there's a big .nl with millions of domain names, and Amsterdam and FRL are quite small. But we are all looking, if you look into numbers, you see that only a fraction of the population in your country really has a domain name. There are a lot of people and a lot of companies which have more than 1, 2, 3, 4, or even more domain names. So there's a small fraction, and I'm always curious how to widen the basis of domain names in the country. And I think CCTLDs could have a big role in broadening the market overall, and that would be one question I have for the panel and for the audience. And as we are very small around here, I would be happy to to have you all engaged. There are microphones on all tables here, so please feel free to give your comment or another question to the panelists. Yeah. So who wants to start with answering the first question on what can CCTLDs do for broadening the registrant basis in their country and the acceptance of domain names?
All right. Well, actually, I do have a lot of observations and comments to make just to the various slides Dirk presented, and I probably do have the chance to do that later, because I'm not too convinced with some of the facts he's been presenting, but we can dwell on that later. To answer the question, first let me state that there is, I think, .nl is the leading CCTLD with respect to the number of inhabitants with a domain name registration, and I think it's 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4. So there actually really is a lot of room there. But then in the presence of social media and mobile apps, I think the one thing that we are really concerned with is how do we make sure that domains do not, what I would call, subsurface, right? That they just do not become a technical means that still needs to be there, but is just not seen for the customers. And I think we've been looking for the killer application for almost 20 years. We haven't seen it, right? So we talking about domain name industry, we came up with something like enum, for example, so telephone number, domain mapping didn't go far, didn't get any traction on the market because it was just being used for voice over IP. So not a killer application. The one thing we are looking for is the killer application. If I would know the killer application, I would sure not be sitting here, but I would be implementing it here. So if we are talking about domain name in innovations, this could probably just be some ideas dropping. And what comes to my mind with respect to ideas dropping, I think what we need is that first we make sure that domains are being perceived as your digital representation on the net. You meaning enterprises, you meaning end users as well. And what we could probably do is just build on the discussions that just surfaced right now, where we are talking about self-determination, where we're talking about sovereignty. So why not build on, well, identities? This is at least one thing I feel we can build on to make domains more attractive. Very long speech, very short resume. Identities.
Well, hello from me. Well, we're at Switch from .ch and .li. I'm representing Liechtenstein as well. And I mean, get this. I mean, they have 30,000 people, but 68,000 domain names. So they're doing something good. But still, what we have now, we still have a growth of around 3 to 4%, which is actually, we're quite happy about that. But of course, it's quite different to what it was 10 years ago. But we just recently had actually a discussion in our company, or actually a meeting, like an innovation brainstorming. What could we do? And actually, we weren't really inventing new things in this meeting, but what we want to is retain as much domain names as we have and keep them. And the direction we're heading now, that's not really innovation, is that we want to have as much as a secure space as we can offer. And that's actually where we're investing in manpower and in technology, that our domain space is secure. But that's so far for innovation. But we currently have, I think that's maybe could be a difference to the new GTLD. Like about 80% of our close to 2.1 million domain names, they're actually in use. And that's something which is actually quite good. I mean, they're not just, they have DNS, there's somebody using this. And, but it's really, in our case, and I guess a lot of CCTLDs, it's more about keeping what you have. And we don't have really, like Jörg said, haven't found the killer app, how we can actually prosper more, get more growth.
Hi, from AM CCTLD perspective, I'd like to say that to the question you said. We've never had an objective to have the registration, the high registration in our CCTLD, but rather we wanted to give the opportunity for our citizens and our community members to have that domain names. Which is like identity, as you said. And for this reason, we also launched the IDN CCTLD lately. This is the identity thing, but I would agree with you saying that it is also important to keep these domain registrations. We had a situation last year when we had a high increase of registrations, and it was done by Chinese registrants. So this is not only in GTLD market, but in CCTLD also. So Chinese boom was very noticeable. But then we also noticed that they do not keep these domain names. So the objective of CCTLD, at least for us, is to give this opportunity, not just to have the highest rate of registration. So the questions about the domain market is really very great, and I have, if I may have the question to .eu about the policy thing. Do you have a limitation for registration, the domain name, only for citizens or entities living in EU, European Union state, or it's open for all others as well?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, we do have a limitation. So based on the regulations, in order to register a .eu, you have to be a resident in the EU or an organization established in the EU. And this is what links to the identity, and listening to you talking now, because one of the considerations as well, in view of the revision, is whether we should change those eligibility criteria. I mean, for example, it is based on residency, as I said. If you are a European citizen and you move to China, to the US, you're not allowed to have a .eu. Yeah, even if you still have a European passport, because you don't live in the EU, you don't have it. So it's totally based on residence. And we're wondering, is this fair? Should we reconsider? Should we reconsider just about the individuals? Should we reconsider about organizations?
Can I just have a quick comment on that? I'm Relika from .eu Registry, actually myself. I just wanted to comment that in 2014 we actually included European Economic Area countries to the eligibility area as well. So 3 more countries than EU. British. Right now, they're still with us.
Ardi, but from a registrar's perspective, do you have something to add to the fellow panelists?
Okay, I'll try to think of something. First, I take my role as provider of local color very seriously. From a service provider perspective, domains for us do not exist in a bubble. They are part of an overall internet presence, which includes resources and includes applications. And what we like to see is demand for domain names driven by applications, because that's where real use of domain names really comes from. For example, if we look at these new GTTLDs, most of these domain names are parked. So I wouldn't say that they create additional value to society as a whole. They just sit there and are, let's say, used for speculative purposes. But there's no innovation in speculation. So yeah, where we kind of see growth, healthy growth in the domain name space to be at, is with applications and people using the domain names for some kind of value creation, either for themselves or for the society as a whole. And if we are looking at a killer app, I think we should be looking at young people, because currently young people are trapped in silos inside Instagram, Facebook, etc. These are not identities which are under their control. These are identities under the control of a service provider. So if we could find a way where we could create value for young people from within the domain name space, I think that's where a potential for serious growth could be.
Yeah.
So I had a question and a comment. I'm from the .lv, Latvia, Domain Name Registry. And we went through the DESI, the Digital Economic and Society Index, and researched about how many people and businesses in Latvia have their own domain names, have their presence, and we are one of the most passive in the European Union. We have 56% only of entrepreneurs have some kind of website. So it's not. So we have a large, like almost 40% of businesses are openers. So we have still way to grow. But the problem that we saw also when analyzing the DESI data was that, as you mentioned, the young people, they don't think about the digital identity, how to strengthen it. And when we want to give the information and educate young people, the entrepreneurs as well, sometimes they're even even less than the young people. And when we give our registrars also some resources to spread around their blogs, and so they don't do that. So I'm not even really sure why is that, but we already see the result. 50% of our domain names go away from our local registrars to foreign registrars, either to the closest ones. I'm not sure if that's the reason, but we are now researching, is it because of the price or the services that they offer there, or it's because of the information, or it's because of the client support that maybe not in the native language, but maybe much better. But that's how we addressed our own registrars and said, hello, we need to collaborate even more because your clients are going away. When we will research it and get like strict results, we will be happy to share. But even that is not stimulating for them to collaborate and educate not only their own customer support, that sometimes doesn't know much about the digital identity and domain names itself, but know much about their own services, and to educate their own clients about how it's important for them to have the domain name and strengthen it. So maybe it's a question also to registrars. Is it Is it the same situation here, or is it just typical for us in Latvia? Or as you as a registrar don't want to be, if you don't want to share such kind of information with your clients, or what are we doing wrong? What should we do better?
First of all, we are also a registrar for Latvia. So we will take this critique home and ponder upon it very seriously. Yeah, yeah. I think it's a universal issue which is not specific to Latvia. Let's say, we have once considered looking into the Latvian market ourselves, but it's a very competitive space, where the domain registration space, and it's quite tough for a let's say regionally limited service provider such as ourselves, because there is a huge amount of competition coming from large service providers who shall remain nameless. So I think, let's say, if I were a Latvian registrar, I would seriously look into what am I not providing these customers, what are they looking for elsewhere. It might be, for example, the same GTLD, new GTLD domain names. Maybe the service providers don't adapt to the quickly changing environment, and the customer has, for example, to go for a better price or a more, let's say, wide product range to a international service provider. And once we're kind of in the door, you tend to get stuck. It's not that easy to change service providers eventually, and that's why international service providers are able to create traction among the users of CCTLDs. Because if, for example, you go out there and register a I don't know, .ly or .me or .io at, for example, I don't know, GoDaddy, Namecheap, whatever, and the price difference in the CCTLDs is not that big, then you might stay with international provider.
Okay, then we have Jörg.
Well, I'd like to comment on another tad of the observation you have been making. And I think the question was, what can we do about the number of registrations in the face of the appearance of Facebooks and the alikes, and what are we doing wrongly there? I think we in this industry, we all do know that domains do have some advantages over Facebook, like you are the only one in control. You are not underlying any arbitrariness from the service operator. Then we haven't been able to communicate that perfectly, or even if we are in a position to communicate that properly, people just do not care about it. And I think they do not care about it because social media is offering is servicing every requirement they really need. They want to communicate easily, and they can do that just by registering with any social media, and they do not have to set up things. They registering a domain name, well, there's lots of things you have to do to get the same facilities you have with registering social media. So even if we would like bundle open source software to domains to easily set up communication services and stuff like that, the only thing we would reach is just the same level of usefulness that social media already have. So we would just be trying to follow the market, and I think this is not the right solution for our problem. So when I was citing that digital identity could be a solution for us, what I meant by identity is not so much identity in the sense of IDNs, but what I really meant was a digital identity, so that on the long run you can really, for example, sign, make payments and whatever with your domain name. So something like e-identity based on domains, right? As opposed to based on personal ID cards issued by governments, for example. Like I already know that they do exist in Estonia, but in other European countries or countries around the world, people are not so eager, to put it that way, not so eager to entrust the government with all their data. So this is where independent service providers could come in, where they could provide e-identity that is not controlled by the state and that is not controlled by social media either, but that is controlled by them.
I wanted to add one thing, that all of the domain thing is considered about visibility and findability, and at the same time we are talking about people and social media from the side of having privacy and not being too easily findable. So when we are offering as identity something which is inherently designed to be findable and easily visible, then I'm not sure we are offering the right solution for the identity questions. Maybe the ID cards and things like that work better for these things.
You had before, when you made your first marks, you mentioned innovation, and when talking about social media or the ID card or whatever, this is this takes us to innovation. So actually, and this was one of the headlines of the topic as well. And when I started thinking about the competition and the innovation, my first question would be for the panel, and what we mean by innovation. What do you in registries or a registrar or whatever organizations, what do you see as innovation when we're talking about domain names? Because the larger probably, or the more important questions would come later, like whether DNS has future at all concerning all the apps or the social media you were naming. So this would be my first questions. What do you as panelists see innovation for?
Thank you. Can you put the slide, the first slide of your slide deck, the timeline? Is it possible?
To have that GTLD timeline, the first.
Yeah, that one. No, the first one of this slide.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have it.
Oops.
Yeah.
This one.
Okay, this is very interesting. I think I'll spend a couple of minutes on that one. And I apologize because I will have to leave for another meeting in around 15 minutes. So, but there is another colleague from ICANN who will be here down the road, down the room. So if you have questions. First of all, it's amazing to see a session on GTLDs at a EuroDIG, and with so much discussion on these things. I mean, working at ICANN, it's a day-to-day business, but you wouldn't expect to have such interest from a larger internet governance debate. So if I can stand up, thank you. So, you know, this is very interesting when you said, what is the future of GTLDs or TLDs? One thing that comes out is that TLDs are very old. So, I know, 1980, I mean, I was 1 year old. And, you know, I was 1 year old, and look. So the question is, where are we going? So far they endured probably the most revolutionary changes in the internet. Actually, till here, there was no internet. You know, till here there was no World Wide Web. There was a sort of network of networks that it did exist, but it was mainly .ARPA is the very first network that was used, and was mainly based on the technology of TCP/IP. And till here, there was no ICANN. You know, there was no ICANN, and all the top-level domain names were assigned, mainly the CCTLDs, which existed before ICANN, as you can see, were assigned by one guy seated in his office at the University of Southern California, who literally had a block note and would note in this very old school block note, okay, you are French research university and you would like to join our network, perfect, it's fine. I think you can go and manage the .fr. And then suddenly, and another thing, by 1998, you know how many millions of internet users we had worldwide? Around 150 million of internet users. And today's about 4 billion, 3.6, something like that. And around this time, the role of top-level domain names, and we speak about the .com bubble, if someone of us remember, was central in the evolution of the internet. Actually, 1998 is also when Google was launched. And then in 2004, Facebook came to be. And we had the first round of GTLDs, the second round of GTLDs. Clearly, if you map it with the expansion of the internet, and then you understand why ICANN was invented in the first place, and why we needed to get a process that would be inclusive and would embed innovation into the way we expand this whole evolution of the internet. And then we have to wait till the launch of new GTLDs, so let's say at the end of 2013, to realize that not everybody in this world speaks a language with a Latin script. And actually, even nowadays, 1 of every 4 internet users is Chinese and doesn't use an ASCII-based keyboard and use a completely Chinese character keyboard, but he was forced to write on the address bar of his browser or her browser everything but what was at the right-hand side of the dot in Latin script. So that's another key important part of innovation. And we tend to forget when we look at the GTLD program, also when we look at the competition, we do look very much from, I think we are biased from our Western world on the fact that we look at the internet as a very Western California-based till nowadays, in invention, but indeed it's global. And the other thing that we kind of overlook is that when we started with top-level domain names, nobody thought that the internet would become that, and nobody thought that the internet would be one day the place where we do phishing, DDoS attacks, cyber wars, And one thing that was clear is that, well, probably a top-level domain name is not the most secure system to do that. And with the new GTLD program, we introduced this system, which is called DNSSEC, which puts another layer of security. And how do you factor in competition? How do you factor in? Well, you have to see that, but indeed, it's a clear point into the innovation part. And then one thing that I think is very innovative is that, especially when ICANN was set up, the idea is that, well, one person himself can really manage all that, but probably one company itself can really take the decision on how these things evolves, because this company cannot be comprised by people as smart as I am that can foresee how the internet evolves. So the trick here is that we get everybody participating and collectively decide how the internet evolves. And that was the result of the GTLD program. It took 7 years of discussions of people saying, well, maybe we cannot go along with one round and then a second round. And we need to work together and set up some rules and some process to go ahead with that. And ICANN, for people that don't know, is a not-for-profit organization. And all the money that were accumulated with the new GTLD program is not used to increase my salary or pay a fancy new car for Nigel, or a private jet for our CEO. But even on what we do with all this money, so now for those of you who are following the new GTLD program, we had an unforeseen amount of money that was the result of the auctions. What happens if two or more people apply for the same top-level domain name and they all have the same rights to do that? Well, at the beginning, the community thought, well, this is something that is going to be very unlikely. Another untold thing is that even the community, in the wildest calculation, they expected something around 500 new applications, something like that. It came to be there were 2,000 applications that came in. And so this last resort solution of having auctions ended up being quite popular. And we have now 250 million around US dollars in a bank account which is separate. And the community also has to discuss on how to use that, thinking in mind that our goal is still that, is to figure out what is next, and how do we go into the innovation, and how do we make sure that we survived so far and there is a future for us. And I think I stop because I can go for hours on that, but luckily I'll have to go to another meeting. But if you have questions. Yeah. No, I have 5 minutes more.
I just want to ask about new IDN GTLDs because nobody mentioned it. And how do you think do they still have any chance comparing to the new GTLDs? And if yes, how you see it? Thank you.
So I think, one thing that struck me, as of now, the largest top-level domain name is .com. And there's something like 120 millions of domain names, something like that. And then the second one, I think is TK? Yeah. But and then you have .review, and then you have .cn, and then you have .cn in Chinese scripts, and then finally, yeah. So I think that to really appreciate how much the IDN will increase, you need to look at it from a completely different perspective, and I think we cannot even fancy that. We cannot even. We are at the infancy of the internet explosion in all regions of the world. And if you look at the next billions of internet users, it won't be us, it won't be our kids. I'm 38, I have no kids, Someone in China now can have 2 kids, and they are, and they don't speak Chinese, they don't understand. And I think these things also survives the threat of social media, the threats of, because we still look, Facebook has 2 billion of users, which is a large size of the internet population worldwide. And they want to go to the whole world. Will they reach that? I don't know. But still, the internet is based on this technology, and this technology doesn't really completely overlap with the Facebook, the social network that we know, because it's our view of the internet. If they have social network in Russia, they have social networks in China, they have social networks, in other parts of the world, but they don't have the same prominence as here. So I think, to your question, probably in the next few years, we will see that the IDN really spiking it up in numbers and yeah.
Well, basically not commenting on the development of IDNs because I just can't speculate about it. It's all about reaching out to the population and literacy and all that kind of stuff. So it's very hard to give a prognosis on that one. But I would like to comment on the impression, at least I got, by some presentations of my fellow panelists, that the new GTLD round means innovation. I personally do not think so. just by presenting more of what was already there. Is that really innovation? I certainly doubt that. And if you take a closer look on the development of those new GTLDs, then I think it makes you even think about it. Because every news string, or a lot of news strings that have the same business model as the legacy TLDs or CCs, and if they only rely on number of registrations, they do have a problem. So there's no innovation in that. Or at least there has been some innovation, like dot voting. They have a completely new concept with them. I would even see something like dot secure as being a new concept because they are not relying on the number of registrations, right? But then, if you take a look and compare the CCs or GTLDs, legacy GTLDs, in comparison to new GTLDs, then I can hardly believe that what Dirk really said is true with respect to did we really get more competition? Are they really innovative and are they successful? Because coming from, or taking a look at my market, we do have a market share of well over 60% in Germany. And I'm also the chair of the board of directors of Centra, the European CCTLD Association. And over there as well, I do see market shares of well above 60%. And we have a share of new GTLDs of just below 2%. So is that really competition? Well, at least I do not see it that way. And taking into consideration that 70% of this 2% are parked, are just being used for speculation, I doubt we have more choice, we have consumer trust with new GTLDs. I don't see it.
Hi, so this is Zach with Valadeus. So I think that's, I want to bring together a couple of things that I think we've heard, and one of them was from Dirk at the beginning of his presentation. He was saying that the CCTRT purposefully excluded brands with Spec 13 and Code of Conduct, and actually I think that brands do brands who have applied and now run their own new GTLD don't operate with that same business model, like you said. They're not trying to get volume of registrations. They're doing it perhaps exactly for those reasons about consumer trust. And well, actually, if you own Barclays Bank owns .Barclays, then that's a real indication of consumer trust in a way that Barclays.com with a misspelling, or Apple, like PayPal with the ones instead of an L, it's working in a different way. And actually, to bring those kind of points back together, if there's, if about 550, I think was the number, if about 550 of those successful applications were brands, then about a third of those new GTLDs are innovative just by being brands GTLDs. So that's my, thank you.
Okay. Talking about the market share of new TLDs, new GTLDs, Jesus Christ. We are a bit worse off than Germany. In Estonia, when we look at our numbers, we see that the market penetration of new GTLDs is 0.01%. So, are we worse off or better off? That depends on the point of view. Sure. Regarding the GTLDs, I'm sorry, but they are an easy target because having a price list in Chinese is not really that huge amount of innovation. And currently about 50% of these new GTLDs are registered to China, and about the same number are parked. So that kind of hints on their usefulness. But there is a let's say, security is a boring subject, but and as we say, it's being tossed around a lot. But there's some really troubling correlation regarding new GTLDs and innovation in crime. Because, for example, if we look at what are currently the 10 most abused top-level domain names, these are basically all GTLDs. I personally know service providers who have blocked all GTLDs from their mail servers because the, let's say, ratio of bad stuff to good stuff is really low. And so in that sense, I'm kind of worried that if registries don't innovate on that side of stuff, the security front, then this whole new GTLD thing might not end that well for most of these registries. So surely innovating in the security space should be a priority for new GTLDs.
I would like to take that thought that Ardi said in security being innovation, and this brings me back to the question I actually as well asked from the panelists. As you come from somewhat different backgrounds, different companies, then what is innovation in domain name space for you? You already basically mentioned what it could be, but as from a registry perspective, as maybe from ISO perspective.
I would say defining innovation is very hard, but I would say that what we see as the most, what we like to see top-level domain names do is create simple things which add value to the domain registrants. In many meetings, I've kind of brought up .eu as a, let's say, the perfect registry or almost perfect registry. For example, one thing which I personally considered somewhat innovative at the time was having basically who is privacy included in the domain price for private individuals. And we see a lot of people registering .eu domain names just to get their, let's say, privacy fix, because their email addresses are not publicly available to spammers, etc. So that's kind of one of the examples of the kind of innovation we like to see. Something simple, but which is appreciated by the users. And there's also innovation in the internet presence market, which is a domain name combined with something else. I would say that, for example, the Let's Encrypt initiative is something which TLDs should surely look into, supporting, advocating, etc. Because technically it's much more secure to have your own domain name, your own resources, under the protection of TLS than having shared resources under the protection of someone else's certificate. So these are not, these are not unicorns or something special. They are not out of a fantasy novel, but these are simple things that coincidentally both are from privacy and security space. But yeah, maybe that's something that we would be very, let's say, interested to look into. And I think many registries will be forced to look into privacy because of, the four-letter acronym nobody dares to mention.
Can I?
Okay, going on with answering what have we done about security. Well, we have introduced DNSSEC a couple of years ago. We are providing support for DANE, which is DNSSEC-based authentication, so where you can use your own certificates if you do not trust certificates that have been issued by any central authority that already have been corrupted. We know that. So DANE certainly is some innovation on the security front. But then let's be quite frankly about it. Even though DNSSEC is running with us for, I think, probably 7 or 8 years, I don't know for sure, not even by heart. Still, we got 1.0% of DNSSEC secured domains. So obviously, security is not sexy. It's not working.
In response to what you said, I mean, or just to DE as well, it's roughly as well around 1%, if we're lucky, for our domain space. And about this privacy thing, this comes down then, I think, to the certain laws that apply to certain registries. In our case, for Switzerland, we accept that. But I know other spaces, they do not allow that by law. And but I agree with you, that will be an issue in the future because people want that. And I understand that they want that, but we'll see.
Yeah, about DNSSEC. We are situated in the center of Tallinn. If you look out that window, you will see a large building of a Swedish bank. You can guess whether they are using DNSSEC or not. What we are kind of looking into, or what we are seeing, was maybe DNSSEC was a bit too mystified. Maybe it was presented as too much of a panacea to huge problems, and maybe people tried to go with DNSSEC from 0 to 100 miles an hour in a couple of seconds, because when the Estonian top-level domain registry started working on DNSSEC, what we saw was basically frustration from all sides, because we, I believe, maybe are one of 2 registries, or registrars, sorry, here in Estonia who support DNSSEC. I think 95% or something of DNSSEC enabled domain names have been registered by us. And so users were kind of told that DNSSEC is a must, but they were also told that DNSSEC is really complex. It's cryptography, it's algorithms, stuff like that. And they kind of got scared because it seemed too complicated. To be honest, we kind of got frustrated because, when you invest into a technology and you see that you're the only one, it makes you doubt whether you've made the right business decisions. And I think the registry also has been quite frustrated because no one has really, no other registrars have really implemented DNSSEC. What I would kind of like to see in the DNSSEC space is, things like Dane, which are good in the sense that Let's Encrypt is great, but it should have competition. It shouldn't be a monopoly on the certificate market. Dane could provide that kind of competition. And maybe kind of try to, let's say, talk down the NSX complications a bit, because those shouldn't be kind of presented to the end user. They should just have a checkbox, enable the NSX, and if in the best scenario it should be enabled by default, and we shouldn't really kind of maybe make it into a huge issue as it is being done today.
We rename it to DNSSEC and we see what happens.
Could we have the Twitter wall again, please?
I guess Estonia is not the only country who battles with the DNSSEC. A lot of countries do, and statistics is very different. It depends on the viewpoint or the starting point of the country. How do you solve all the issues with the DNSSEC?
I think he was going to go first. No.
I was just going to point out that, interestingly, we only have, I don't know, maybe hundreds of domain names with DNSSEC enabled. Someone's looking up.
Altogether?
Yeah.
1,000.
Oh, okay. So that's 1%. A bit less than 1% of all domain names. But 70% of domain name resolutions are DNSSEC capable here in Estonia. So we should kind of try to bring those two together.
So my question comes from a different perspective, and more precisely, when looking at the graph on the previous slide that was on the screen, you could see a lot of GLTs being, taken into use and launched in the future. So that really makes me worried and scared for the earlier right holders, such as trademark owners, because domain name registration is based on a first-come, first-served principle. However, especially when making available new GTLTs and other TLDs, it's a very good opportunity for cyber squatters or typo squatters to register different domain names which they are not in fact entitled to. So with ICANN and GTLTs, there's the sunrise period, which helps a little bit, but at the same time, it's physically impossible to register all possible domain names, and which could comprise the trademark, for example. And also, even after the registration, an infringing registration, you can enforce your rights, but it's very, very expensive considering the amounts of infringing domain names. So my question is that, is the first come, first served principle viable in the long run, and with more and more GTLTs and TLDs becoming available, or may substantial examination concerning earlier rights, such as in many EU countries it is with trademarks, become the norm in the future? And if not, what could be the solution concerning the numerous infringements? Thank you.
Unless anyone else wants to... Sure, great. So this is Zach Valades again. I'd really really, really great comment, I think, and you know, definitely speaks to something that, you know, brand owners, I think, absolutely find true. I'd really invite you to kind of get involved with the ICANN kind of rights protection mechanisms review and subsequent procedures, those sorts of reviews, and they're exactly the sorts of questions being considered. And right now, particularly in the back end of rights protection, there's going to be a discussion about UDRP, which is that really expensive way of getting domain names back. So if you're not already, come and speak to me afterwards, and I'll put you in touch with the people, you know, where you can like really get involved and ask those questions, perhaps in a more appropriate fora where, you know, those sorts of things will get robustly discussed and the new policies will directly come out of there. So thanks very much.
So I'm Adam Peake from ICANN. Andrea mentioned that I may have a comment. There's one thing, DNSSEC, we believe there are about 750 million who are using DNSSEC validating resolvers at the moment, and that means end users, and they haven't done anything. It's the network service providers, ISPs, enterprise networks, people who run networks who implement DNSSEC. We don't change our devices at all. So there's about 25% of internet users are sitting behind DNSSEC resolvers right now. If you want to know how to do it, and particularly for Estonia, then we will be more than happy to arrange training sessions for this if we haven't done so already. John Crane is here. He's our security officer, chief security officer. We can start talking about it right now, and we'd be more than happy to put on training here and across the region. It's what we're trying to do across Europe and all parts of Europe at the moment. And training is free, and we'll probably go for a drink too. Thanks.
To comment on that, actually, we have already agreed to that. So we haven't spread the news, but we just met with John today, so it's all set.
Again, trying to praise .eu. We got our training at EuroDIG.
Yeah, I have a comment to the trademark infringement things from our perspective with .Berlin and .Hamburg. We see that if you have a TLD which has a reasonable price to the registrars and a reasonable price to the end user and restrictions, then all these cyber squatters and trademark infringers are not there. So essentially for us is having restrictions in a TLD makes it easier to enforce everything, and also a higher price provides some security. And if you see where the trademark infringements come in except of .com, and TK, it's X, Y, Z, and some TLDs which cost a cent a year or something like this. So domain names cost a cent a year. So that's essentially, and that brings us or me to the question again: does the price plays a role in that? Because a lot of CCTLDs are quite cheap, I would say, from the perspective of a high-priced geo top-level domain name. So would high prices bring more value to the market, and having less domain names that are let's say just parked for speculation? That's a general question I have to the audience and the panel.
Was the question that will high prices bring value?
High prices and registrations restrictions. Let's say only people from Estonia or the European Union or something like this.
I think there's definitely a sweet spot at somewhere below maybe $10, but above a few dollars, where things get too expensive to register thousands of domain names for spamming and stuff. So yeah, pricing does matter, but I don't think that it matters a huge amount. For example, we don't see, although .eu again, sorry, although .eu has quite competitive prices, we don't see .eu being abused that much.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more abuse going on in the .com space than in the .eu space. So, but they have restrictions, so there might be something in that.
Mm.
I have a comment regarding the price and the DNSSEC, because in Latvia we have a 50% discount if the domain name is signed by DNSSEC. So that was a really active signing of for the domain names for DNSSEC that year when we announced and when everybody implemented the DNSSEC. So our situation a little bit in Latvia is a little bit better, but still not as good as it would seem. So it was a huge peak in the very beginning. So now we have about 3% of the domain names signed by DNSSEC in the .lv zone. But still now, even though they're used to the discount and they now think, well, that's nothing much. So we are thinking about the DNSSEC training. And for those registrars who have applied that, are talking to us and asking us when you will talk to the end users and explain what DNSSEC is. And because we have implemented it, we have a discount from you, that's good, but we want for the clients to come and ask that they need this. And now they're coming to us and saying, okay, now you have to do something else for the DNSSEC, just talk to the end users as well. So I think the price is a good teaser in the very beginning, but afterwards everybody get used to it, and it will be not a good thing at the very end. So that's just experience in Latvia.
I would like to comment about the speculation. I'm from Estonian Internet Foundation, and 1.5 years ago, we decided to abolish our local presence requirement. And what happened, what we didn't expect, was that our market was really popular in China. And in the first quarter of 2013, our growth was the highest in Europe. It was like around 14%. Or even more. Anyway, we got like 27,000 new domains. It was huge speculation that was going on, and we had no idea back then, are they going to renew those domains? What will happen? Because we got a lot of letters from them that you should make for us the discount price, or a lot of those, like the price was still for them too high. But we decided not to do that because it's our politics today. And after 1 year, the domains that was renewed was around 7,000 domains. So we lost around 20,000 domains. Still, some of them, investors still kept it. We don't know what they're going to do with that because we have seen they actually don't use those domains. It's still for the speculation. So, yeah, we're still popular in Chinese market because one blogger wrote 1 year ago, when it was huge growth, that .ee means in China virtual eye, and .ee registry should really invest to market .ee in China because it would have a huge market there and it would be really popular. But still, because we would look at today, I would say that we still see ourselves as CCDLD, not GDLD, like .me or .tv, which are really popular in China.
Actually, I wanted to comment the price matter as well. If I'm correct, if I remember correctly, in Latvia for the GA, there was a presentation about, I think it was Latvian CERT, a guy from there, they did an analyze on domain names used for different purposes, and I think that his outcome, the outcome of his research was that the price, if you want to do something with a domain name, whether it's good or bad, the price doesn't matter. Because in their scale, they had domains used for different negative purposes from, I don't know, from $1 to $25 or 25 euros. So I guess there are less, but still the price matters. But if someone really wants something to use for something, then the price does not matter.
So, You have another question on innovation?
I had a lot of questions, but luckily there were a lot of people who said a lot of things, so I didn't have to use my prepared questions that much. Does anybody have any comments before? We need some time for remarks as well.
Yeah. The microphone.
So, Dusan, but I will not speak because there is a silence on remote participation. So I will not speak as a remote moderator. I will put my devil hat on my head and I will say, okay, if first TLD was .arpa, what is the difference between .berlin and .arpa? 4 letters, 5 letters, who cares? From the user perspective, 40 years, the structure of domain names and every single logic for the users is the same. So there is no change in that. We can speak about evolution or revolution. When you said that new GTLDs are not innovation, they are not revolution, they are evolution. When you said that IDN is not innovative thing, or let's say not precisely like that, but they are evolution also, not revolution. So when you say about DNSSEC, okay, let's compare this to safety belt in the cars. Is that innovation? No, sorry. This is something that needs to be called the evolution, because up until the 70s, 80s, we were driving the cars without safety belt and other technologies, I don't know. So now we need to drive the car with safety belt on. So I don't see clearly the answer about what is innovative in domain name world. All of that is evolution. Where is the revolution? What is innovation in here? I don't see clearly. And on the other hand, one little comment about digital identity. Digital identity is not only domain name. And when you say youth are using social network, yes, they are using social network to build their digital identities, but not with name of Facebook page or profile or whatever, with the content. So domain name is not, is one part of the story. Hosting, servers, other services, and web page is the other part of building this the digital identity. So how many times did you hear that registries, I will cut, that registries are educating people about hosting packages, technologies, FileZilla, FTP, I can go on and go on, but it's mutual thing between registrars, hosting companies, which are mostly hosting companies, and registries. Registries have the problem to educate people about domain names, but the registrars have problem to educate people about hosting, etc. So if you want to make it easy for the user, so you need to work together to educate youngsters that Facebook, if tomorrow is done, I don't know, bankruptcy or something like that, their Facebook page is gone. But you need to build something innovative for them, that hosting and domain name will be simple enough to use like Facebook page. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great statement. Before Mr. Zuckman brings everything together, our messages from EuroDIG, and
So,
make a small summary of that meeting.
No, of course, thank you. So, yeah, I realise that I'm standing between you guys and lunch, so in the interest of brevity, I thought it might, first of all, be really useful to start off just by saying thank you to Dirk and Marga for organising, and the panel, of course, for coming along and contributing so usefully for a really interesting session. So thanks very much, guys. Great. So I think I'm going to try and do this in 3 points. So the first was, I think, we're kind of working on the assumption that new TLDs have significantly changed the TLD space. Does anyone kind of contest that as a first statement? Anyone got any improvements? Okay, and then the second one, I think that there's probably no silver bullet in terms of the best use of a domain name, but we've talked around you know, how they could be a helpful marker of digital identity as a kind of second statement point. I'm looking around for thoughts on that. Okay, all interested in lunch, clearly. And the third one is that I was trying to keep this one kind of positive. So new GTLD domain names might present opportunities for innovation in the areas of security, and we talked about DNSSEC, the development of IDNs, and around the kind of use of brands TLDs as kind of opportunities for the future. Anyone got anyone to add? Anything to add on those? Yeah, no, please do.
I actually did want to add one other thing regarding the innovation perspective. From .eu, we are currently working on an algorithm that would be perceiving while the domain name is being registered, the info would gathered if to look at the history and by the self-learning algorithms, if the domain name would have abusive tendencies. So just by checking this, we would potentially prevent these domain names being registered. That, of course, means that we cannot really discard the registration, but would withhold the enabling of name servers within 24 hours. And spammers usually let the domain name go by that time. So this is something .eu is working currently.
Thank you. I'll add that in. So if anyone's got any kind of suggestions as to reframing those, you know, come and chat to me afterwards. So thanks very much for, yeah, thanks very much all for coming. Have a great lunch.
Yeah, thank you.